if you don't have an agreement, then you don't have a contract. It's that easy, right? No agreement, no contract. Welcome back, class. This is Professor Watson. This is Contracts, LGLA 1351. We're on week 4, right? Chapter 3. This is our first recording for Chapter 3, so I hope you're taking them in the right order. Chapter 3, we're talking about agreement. Remember, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the 5 or the 4 or the 4 elements of a contract, or the 5 elements of a contract, or the 4 elements in one condition, or however you wanted to count it, right? Remember, we talked about there's an agreement. That's the first element of every single contract. Then you also have consideration, mutuality, legality, and capacity, right? Those were rounding out the 5. Told you I'd tell you those every week, but remember, agreement is the very first one. That's what chapter 3 is about. And it may seem fairly simple. Of course, you have to have an agreement, right? But it's so basic to a contract, and it can be made so complicated that it's important to spend some time looking at an agreement. So that's what we're going to do here in chapter 3. This is the first recording. I think we'll knock out most of chapter 3 in this first lecture. Second lecture, we'll finish up chapter 3 if we have anything left, and then we'll maybe go through some hypotheticals, okay? So that we can spot exactly where is the agreement, when was the agreement made, right? Because you don't know what the terms of the agreement are unless you can spot and pinpoint exactly when the agreement was made. Okay, so agreements are very important. I hope you've already read chapter 3. I hope you have looked at here. Let me see if I can share the screen. I hope you've already taken a look at the lecture notes, right? They look something like this. Those should be in your materials. They should be in the link below. The lecture notes are helpful. There's a brief example here. I think I've got that in the PowerPoint too. But if you come down here to the back, I've also actually cut and pasted a couple of statutes for you from the UCC. We'll be talking about our new friend, the UCC, some this afternoon, and about how UCC law is different from the common law. So those two statutes or 2 sections from the UCC are right there. You could, of course, find those yourself, but those are in the class notes if you want to take a look at those. Otherwise, let me pull up the PowerPoint. I think that may be easier. Let's start there. Okay, so an agreement. What is an agreement? Remember from chapter 1, those 4 or 5 elements of a valid contract: agreement, consideration, mutuality, legality, and capacity. The first one is agreement. And so this week we're going to take a more in-depth look at an agreement. So what are we talking about when we say an agreement? You all, it's not a hard word. Agreement is, it's a kindergarten word. Everybody knows what an agreement is, right? Well, not necessarily. Because remember, this is the law, and what is or is not an agreement doesn't depend on Webster's dictionary necessarily. It depends on what the common law is. What have the courts decided is the meaning of an agreement. When you read contract cases, you will see over and over again this term. An agreement is a meeting of the minds. A meeting of the minds. It's almost cliche. Now, if you're writing a brief to a court, don't you dare go get a thesaurus and try to find some substitute for meeting of the minds. Meeting of the minds is cliche, but it's a term of art. When we're talking about an agreement, we have to have a meeting of the minds. In fact, let me stop sharing the screen so I can make sure that I do this, right? A meeting of the minds. The minds have to meet in exactly the same spot, right? It's not an almost meeting of the minds. It is a meeting of the minds, meaning that for an agreement, both parties, or if you have more than 2, all parties, have to agree on exactly the same thing, right? If they don't agree on exactly the same thing, right? I thought I was agreeing to this and you thought something a little bit different, then we don't have a meeting of the minds. Those 2 ships pass in the night, right? And if we don't have that meeting of the minds, then we don't have an agreement. Let me pull that PowerPoint back up, though. A meeting of the minds. What do we mean by that? Well, to be more specific, we can look at some definitions of agreement, and you'll find 1,000 of them. You can find various cases, even various statutes. You can look in Black's Law Dictionary, but what they all come down to, and I think maybe one of the best definitions of an agreement is a manifestation of mutual assent. A manifestation of mutual assent. Okay, so we're not using kindergarten words anymore. Manifestation, mutual assent. Only 4 words there, but the words are getting bigger, and I think that's a great definition for agreement because it's 4 short words, but it packs a whole bunch of requirements in those 4 short words. Okay, let's take a look at each word individually. What is a manifestation, right? How many of you like watching horror movies and ghost movies, right? What is a manifestation? When somebody sees a ghost, that's a manifestation of a spirit, right? A manifestation is something observable that shows an abstract idea, right? So how do we know if the parties reached an agreement? There has to be some kind of manifestation, something observable that shows that that agreement was reached. So could that be a written contract? Absolutely, 100%. A written contract is a manifestation of the agreement, right? It is something observable. It's physical. It's tangible. But do you always have to have a written contract to have an enforceable contract, to have an agreement? No. There's other types of manifestations, right? Manifestations could be oral. I say, will you sell me that watch for $10? And you say, yes. We now have a manifestation. You could observe me speaking. Somebody could have observed that conversation, seen me speaking, seen you speak back. Even if they didn't observe it, we could tell somebody, yes, we had that conversation. Now, maybe they don't believe me. Maybe you say, no, that conversation never happened. But at least we have some evidence of a manifestation. There's something observable that shows that abstract idea. In fact, it doesn't even need to be that direct, right? A manifestation could be something as simple as I said, hey, I'll pay you $10 for that watch. And you nodded your head up and down and said, right? Were you intending to accept the offer? Maybe. You made a sound, you made a head move. It may be up to a jury to decide whether that was an acceptance, whether we had a meeting of the minds, whether that was an agreement. But at least there's a manifestation there, right? So something observable, something that we can put into evidence, something that we can testify about or show the judge or show the jury. That's a manifestation. A manifestation of what? Of mutual assent. Mutual, what does that mean? Well, that's that meeting of the minds, right? Mutual means common or shared, right? Between 2 or more parties. If we had a mutual agreement, then we both agreed to the same thing. That's that meeting of the minds. If I agree to buy your watch for $10 and you agree to sell your watch for $12, we don't have a mutual agreement because I said $10, you said 12. We haven't agreed. We've talked about selling the watch, right? But we haven't agreed on all of the details yet. So it's not mutual yet, right? And then assent. What is assent? Assent means agreement, right? It means that you have consented to this deal. You have given your approval. You have agreed to be bound by it. Okay, so a manifestation of mutual assent. That's an excellent definition of an agreement. That will get you through just about any court in the land, right? A manifestation of mutual assent. And so if you're trying to prove that a contract existed, or if maybe the other side, or maybe you're on the defense and you're trying really hard to prove that there was no contract, man, maybe the first thing you want to pull out is that definition of agreement, a manifestation of mutual assent. Is there any evidence that the parties, is there something observable to show that the parties agreed on exactly the same thing? That's the basic definition of an agreement, all right? So how do we prove that, right? I just said it's enough if you and I are alone in a room and nobody else is there to observe it, and I say, I'll buy your watch for $10, and you say, I accept. But how would we prove that? Or I said that if I say, I'll buy your watch for $10 and you nod your head in agreement and go, okay, that could be a contract, but how do we prove it? We look at an objective standard. That's what we use in the courts, an objective standard. What's the difference between an objective and a subjective standard, right? That would be the opposite, would be subjective. Well, an objective standard means that we look at what a reasonable person would believe based on those observable facts, right? That's an objective standard. What a reasonable third person would believe. based on the observable facts. So even if somebody wasn't in the room when I said, I'll buy your watch for $10, is that okay? And you nodded your head up and down. Even if somebody wasn't there to see it, if we can describe that and a reasonable person says, okay, well, based on that, based on those observable facts, that I believe a contract was reached, that's an objective standard. All right. A subjective standard would be, what do the parties themselves believe? All right. Now, it may at first blush seems like, well, that ought to be the case. Did the parties really believe they had a contract? So maybe we should use that subjective standard, Professor Watson. The problem is, we can't ever prove a subjective standard. If we tried to prove what the parties really believed in their heart of hearts, we can't. There's no way to do that, right? I mean, a party could just get on the stand and say, nope, I didn't think we had a contract. I was just joking, right? I didn't believe we had a contract. I didn't believe this was going to be enforceable. I didn't think that I was ever going to have to follow through with that contract. And there would be no way to disprove that, right? The only way to disprove it would be for an outside reasonable third party to look at the observable facts and say, well, you may say you didn't intend to be bound by this, but that's not what your words said, right? That's not what your action said. That's not what your written contract said. That's not what the observable evidence says. All right. So when we're looking to prove, was there an agreement in a contract case, we're looking at the objective standard. What are the observable facts? What would a reasonable person believe? Would a reasonable person believe an agreement was reached based on these circumstances, based on these facts that we can testify about, that we can show to the jury, that we can observe? Because we just can't. We can't actually read the parties' minds, so we have to rely on that reasonable man standard. So an objective standard, when we're trying to decide whether an agreement was reached, whether there was a meeting of the minds, a manifestation of mutual assent, we use an objective standard. All right. It's worth talking about how an agreement is reached. What is the method of reaching an agreement? That way we can tell, when we know when the agreement was reached, that helps us know what the terms of the agreement are, right? What if we talked about a whole bunch of possible elements of our agreement beforehand, and we talked about a whole bunch of possible elements afterwards? Well, which ones of those possibilities, which ones of those negotiated terms are actually part of the agreement? Well, we don't know unless we know exactly when the agreement was made. So let's talk about how an agreement is made. Generally, the first step in an agreement is an offer. Okay, every agreement begins with an offer. And as you guessed, offer seems pretty simple, right? That seems like another one of those kindergarten terms. We all know what an offer is. But you can guarantee that if somebody's fighting real hard to get out of a case, they're going to, a really good legal professional is going to get down into the minutia, the nitty gritty, and say, well, was this really an offer? And in fact, lots of cases turn on that. Lots of cases turn on, was something really an offer or not? So let's look at the definition of an offer. An offer is typically defined as an expression of willingness to enter into a binding contract. An expression of willingness to enter into a binding contract, or an expression of willingness to be bound, right? An expression of a willingness to be bound. What does that mean? It means when you make an offer, it has to show that you are intending to be bound by it. It's not just an expression of interest, okay? So there's a difference between, I would sure like to sell my car for $10,000, right? I would sure like to sell my car for $10,000. Is that an offer? Probably not. You're not expressing a willingness to be bound, versus I will sell you my car for $10,000, right? Now that sounds like you intend to be bound by that. I will do this. I'm not just thinking about it. I will do it. It's not, I would like to sell my car for $10,000. I'm thinking about selling my car for $10,000. Maybe even, would you give me $10,000 for my car? Does that express a willingness to be bound, or am I just fishing around for information, right? Versus, I will sell you my car for $10,000 is an expression of a willingness to be bound. Okay, and that's important. It's important, and in fact, you should know that the next time you go to buy a car, right, or you enter into some kind of agreement with somebody, don't ever get tricked by that. Well, would you pay me $10,000? Right? Well, that's not an offer. They haven't put any skin in the game. If they say, would you give me $10,000? And you say, yes, I will give you $10,000 for that. Well, now you've made an offer. You've expressed a willingness to be bound, but they didn't. And so they can say, well, I mean, I don't know if I can sell it for 10. I was just wondering if you could pay 10. But now that I think about it, would you pay 11? Right? And if you say, oh, darn it, you tricked me, but yes, I'll pay you 11 for it. Well, again, you just got tricked again. They didn't express a willingness to be bound. They haven't made an offer. You did when you said, yes, I will pay 10,000. Yes, I will pay 11,000. So pay attention to that next time you're engaged in any kind of negotiation. Is the other side actually making an offer? Are they expressing that willingness to be bound? Are they, therefore engaging in this negotiation? Or are they just playing with you, right? Are they just feeling you out? Are they just trying to see how much you will pay or how much you will take? Let's talk about a little terminology. An offer is made by an offeror, right? An offeror is the one who makes an offer. An offeree is the one who receives an offer, right? The one to whom an offer is made. So an offer is made by an offeror to an offeree, right? Just terms of art, we'll use those quite a bit for the rest of the semester. An offer is made by an offeror to an offeree. So how do we know when we have an offer, right? Could a statement like, man, I would like to sell my car for $10,000. How do we know that's not an offer? Well, there's plenty of case law, plenty of common law out there, right? That has examined exactly these kind of situations. And here's what it boils down to. All right. First of all, an offer, in order to be an offer, the terms of the offer must be sufficiently definite, right? The terms of the offer must be sufficiently definite. So I'm thinking about selling my car versus I will sell you my car. There's probably a difference there, right? A difference, and the difference there is the definiteness. It must be definite enough so that the offeree can understand what the offer is, right? That doesn't mean that every term has to be explicit, but we have this idea of essential terms. The essential terms must be clear. What are the essential terms? We'll talk about those in just a second. But the essential terms must be clear. Some terms can be implied, maybe just from the situation, right? Some term, but they must be sufficiently ascertainable. Ascertainable means we can discover them from the words of the offer or from the circumstance, right? So if I say I will buy your watch for $10, do I have to say I will buy your watch in the exact working condition that it's in now for $10? Or you can say, or can you say, I accept, and then take that watch and bash it on the table and break it and then hand it to me, and then do I owe you $10? No, I think that just from the circumstances, right? I will buy your watch for $10 is sufficiently definite. We've implied terms like in the condition that it's in, right? Any reasonable person would look at that and say, yeah, I mean, he meant he wants to buy it in the condition it's in now. And in fact, that also implies a time element, right? We usually think of that as an essential element is time. When are you going to buy my watch? Can you say I accept and then take my $10, but I don't have to give you the watch for 30 years? No, right? That wasn't explicitly stated. But from the situation, right? We know if I say, hey, I'll buy your watch for $10, I mean, right now, right? Or reasonably promptly. Anybody can interpret that. Whereas what if I just say, hey, I'll buy your watch? Is that an offer? Or I'll sell you my watch. Is that an offer? Probably not. We haven't talked about the essential elements yet, but what is missing there? What's missing there is a price. I'll sell you my watch for what? I mean, if I say I accept, can you say, aha, you owe me $1 million because I meant I'll sell you my watch for $1 million? No, not the essential terms aren't there. right? Before we talk about the essential terms, let's look at some examples. Here's an example. I'll sell you my car versus I'll sell you my Mercedes. Is I'll sell you my car sufficiently definite? Well, it may be. What if I only have one car? If I only have one car and I say, I'll sell you my car, then that probably makes sense, right? But what if I have three cars? Let's make it easier. I have two cars. I have a Volkswagen and a Mercedes. And I say, I'll sell you my car. If you say accept, are you buying my Volkswagen or are you buying my Mercedes? Right. So it depends on the circumstances. I'll sell you my car may be sufficiently definite. It depends on the facts. How many cars do you own? But we still have a problem there. Could you accept that? Is it an offer? I'll sell you my car. Okay. But for how much? Right. We don't have a contract yet because we don't have an offer. We don't have all of the terms that we need. How about I'll sell you my Mercedes for $1,000? Is that sufficiently definite? Well, now I think we're getting somewhere, right? Unless you've got more than one Mercedes, but I'll sell you my Mercedes for $1,000. Now it's not just my car. We know which car. It's the Mercedes. And we know for how much? $1,000. Not right. Now we've got the car sufficiently identified. We've got the price stated. We don't necessarily know the time. Are you do I have to pay right now? Can I have a day to get the money? Can I have a week to get the money? Can I have a year to get the money? Can I have 10 years to get the money? I don't know, right? Maybe that's not sufficiently definite. Maybe if I accept and I whip out $1,000, we've got a deal. Maybe if I say I accept, let me go get $1,000 out of the bank and I bring it to you later in the day or later tomorrow, maybe a reasonable observer would look at those objective facts and say, oh yeah, a day, that's a reasonable time. But is a week reasonable time? A month? A year? That begins to get less clear, right? So maybe if we want to be competent legal professionals and we want to make a good offer, maybe we need to include a little more detail so that we don't have these lingering questions. Let's look at the next one. How about I'll sell you my Mercedes for $1,000 if you buy it by Friday, right? Now we've added something. Now we've added that time element. My Mercedes, $1,000 by Friday. That looks pretty clear, right? Now we've added that time element. We'll talk about those essential elements in a minute. Time is one of them. Sometimes a court will be willing to imply a reasonable time. It doesn't always have to be stated explicitly, but it does have to be it does have to be something that we can determine objectively, right? Determine from those observable facts. But if you include it explicitly in the statement, I'll sell you my Mercedes for $1,000 if you buy it by Friday, man, I think that's about as explicit, right? It's about as clear and understandable as we can make it. Which car? The Mercedes. How much? $1,000. Okay, when? By Friday. That's pretty clear, right? I think that is a definite, the ascertainable facts there are clear, right? We have a definite statement of a willing to be bound. I will sell you my car for $1,000 by Friday. I think that's a pretty good offer. Do you need to go farther? What about I'll sell you my black 2012 Mercedes GL 450 for $1,000 cash in large bills on Friday at 1 p.m. in the parking lot behind school? Well, that's pretty specific, right? We've got all the facts there now. But I don't think those are all necessary, right? If it's important to you, you can certainly include all of those facts in your offer. Maybe you owe some guy $1,000 and he says, you better pay me by 1:15 at the parking lot behind school. And so it's real important that somebody shows up and gives you $1,000 before then in the parking lot behind school. So if that's important to you, you can certainly include those terms and make them part of a contract, but I don't think any offer needs to be that specific to be enforceable. That level of specificity would certainly help. You could avoid any disagreements or misunderstandings probably, but be aware sometimes the more specifics you add, the bigger chance that you have for a breach, right? The more problems you may be creating if you start to create too many specific requirements. All right. So an offer needs to be reasonably certain. It needs to be sufficiently definite so that parties using that objective agreement that objective standard, can understand the terms that the offeror is making to the offeree. But what are those essential terms, those essential elements? Well, typically there are 4 terms that must be included in every offer in order for an offer to be sufficiently definite that we can consider it an offer. Okay. At common law, those 4 elements are the subject of the contract, right? What are we talking about? Well, in our example before, we were talking about a Mercedes, right? A car. The consideration to be given. We haven't talked about consideration yet. We'll get to that in what I think another week, 2 weeks. But consideration, I've given you a little taste of that. Consideration is what you give for what you get, right? So what are you getting for the car? You're getting $1,000. Now, technically, the car is consideration too, right? We have to have something going both ways. So the car is the subject matter of the consideration. That's the subject matter of the contract. That's the consideration on one side, and $1,000 is what you're getting in exchange for it. Typically, we have to be able to identify the parties. Did that offer we talked about a minute ago, did it identify any parties? Let's roll back and look at it. I don't remember any names, but did it identify any parties? Sure it did. I will sell you. I will sell you my Mercedes for $1,000. So if Steve is standing beside us, can he jump in and say, hey, I'll take that deal? No, he cannot, because we didn't make Steve an offer. I didn't say I will sell you or Steve my car for $1,000. I said I will sell you my car for $1,000. So we've identified the parties. We didn't identify time until that very last or second to last offer, right? By Friday at 1 o'clock. Did we have an offer with I'll sell you my car for $1,000? Well, remember, we talked a couple of weeks ago, different types of contracts. You could have an implied contract, or you could have an express contract. Not all terms, for an offer to be sufficiently definite, not all terms have to be express. They only have to be reasonably ascertainable, reasonably definite from the objective, from the observable facts, right? And most courts are willing to imply a reasonable time, right? What is reasonable? Well, it depends on the facts, right? Depends on the situation, depends on what the jury determines is reasonable. If I say I'll sell you this candy bar for $1, jury's liable to believe that a reasonable time is like right now, right? The next 5 or 10 minutes. You can't come back to me in 3 days with $1 and say, hey, where's that candy bar? Whereas a car, if you say I'll sell you a car for $1,000, maybe a jury thinks that a day or 2 or 3 is a reasonable time. And so most courts are willing to, if an offer identifies the subject, it identifies the consideration, it identifies the parties. Oftentimes, make sure you understand, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes courts will imply a reasonable time period in order to make that an offer, right? In order to make that something that can lead to a contract. What is one of the things the court's going to look at to see if it was sufficiently definite? It's going to look to see if the offeree accepted, right? Did they appear to understand what time they were talking about? And in that case, maybe up to a jury to ask, was there a meeting of the minds when the offeror said, I'll sell you my car for $1,000, and he thought 3 days was reasonable, and the offeree said, okay, I accept your offer to buy a car, but he was thinking 3 years was reasonable. Do we have a meeting of the minds, right? So be careful relying on that implied time element, right? Now, we don't always get to pick our cases. We don't always get to be involved in contracts from the start. If we did, maybe we wouldn't need as many contract lawyers. So often they come to us. But if you are in the negotiating process yourself, probably better to include explicitly that time element to make sure that you have those 4 essential elements for any offer. Okay. We talked about sources of law last week. We talked about the UCC versus the common law, right? The common law is the default when it comes to contract law, unless it is superseded by a statute. And the granddaddy of statutes when you're talking about the contract law is the UCC. Understand that the UCC, remember, the UCC was designed to facilitate commerce, to make it easier for merchants and people in business to do business and make things less complicated. Okay. And so the UCC operates a little bit differently from the common law. And so let's talk about the difference. Under the UCC, remember, Article 2 is what we're talking about. Article 2 of the UCC governs the sale of goods by or between merchants. By or between merchants. The UCC, instead of just leaving it up to the jury to decide, well, were there reasonable, were there observable facts from which we can decide that the parties reached the same agreement, right? That they had the meeting of the minds. The UCC recognizes, especially when you have contracts between two merchants, that the way business is done is often on kind of a trade usage or an industry standard, okay? And so the UCC has some provisions, we won't go into all of them today, but the UCC has some provisions to fill open terms, okay? In other words, I told you under common law, you got to be careful if you don't include that time element, because generally a court will allow you to imply a reasonable time, especially if both parties acted like there was a contract, but not necessarily, right? A judge may say, no, you have to have the reasonable terms. I'm not going to imply that. The UCC, however, has these gap filling provisions, that provisions to fill in some open terms, like time, right? If there's an industry custom, right? If grocery stores call wholesalers and order fruit, and there's the understanding in the business that fruit is delivered within 24 hours, right? 24 hours from the order because it's perishable, then the UCC will fill in that term. Will it fill in the subject matter, right? Apples, I'll buy apples. Probably not. I mean, you need to identify what you're buying. You can't just call the wholesaler and say, hey, send me something, right? That's not a contract. It's not sufficiently definite. What about price, right? What about the consideration? Will the UCC fill in price? What do you think? I'm sure some of you said no, but consider how business is done. A lot of times there's a spot price, right? There's an ascertainable market. This is just the going rate for produce right now, or I have it published on my website. It changes, by the hour. Maybe it changes by the minute. And when you called, this was the price at that minute. There may be even an industry standard that, well, as long as the price when I deliver it hasn't, gone up or down by more than 10%, then that's still acceptable in this industry. Okay. So the UCC has some provisions to specifically fill in some of these terms if you don't get all of the essential terms. And it's based on things like history, a course of dealings between the parties, right? Well, if you've done business 1,000 times, I've always bought apples to be delivered within 24 hours at, $5 a bushel, whatever. Well, on the 1,001st time, it may be okay for me just to call you and say, hey, one more time, right? Because now we all understand all those terms. We've done it so many times. We'll talk about the UCC a lot more as we go along here. But understand that under the common law, there's 4 essential terms to an offer, 4 essential terms for it to be sufficiently definite so that the offeree can understand what they're being offered and so that they can accept it and form a contract. Those 4 essential elements are the subject of the contract, the consideration, the parties, and the time. But occasionally, the court will allow those terms to be, they may not have to be explicit, right? As long as they are reasonably ascertainable from the situation, right? They can be implied by the situation. Then a court may be willing to imply some of those terms, like time. All right, and that's different from the UCC because the UCC has specific provisions that allow for filling in some of those missing elements if they're not contained in the offer. Okay. All right. Another element of an offer is that an offer has to be communicated, right? I can't just think that I want to sell you my car for $1,000, right? You can't just look at me and say, I know what you're thinking. I can see it in your eyes. I accept, right? Is that a contract? No, 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 no. An offer has to be communicated. And there's an intent element there, right? It's the way we identify who the parties are. Um, an offer must be communicated by the offeror to the offeree, right? Now, that doesn't mean I have to tell you in person. Maybe I write it down and I hand it to a courier or a mailman, right? And they bring it to you, right? But I have still communicated the offer to the offeree. Or maybe I tell a friend, hey, run over and ask them if they'll run over and tell them I'm willing to sell them my car for $1,000, right? I've still communicated, I've caused it to be communicated to you. The result of that is that you can't accept an offer that has not been communicated, right? And the example a minute ago where you look at me and you go, I know what you're thinking, I accept. You were thinking, you'll sell me your car for $1,000, I accept. Okay, that's a little crazy. But you can't accept something that hasn't been communicated. You also can't accept something that hasn't been communicated to you. That's the example where I said, I'll sell you my car for $1,000. Steve can't jump in and say, I accept. I didn't communicate the offer to Steve. I communicated the offer to you. You must be the intended beneficiary. We have a case brief coming up on Dr. Jatoy, right? And you'll see in that case that that was a case where she wanted to buy into a medical practice. And because of the way the practice was set up, they couldn't just make her an offer because they had a board. But what they did was they solicited offers. They said, hey, who wants to buy into this practice? Make us an offer, and then we'll consider all the offers. So Jatoy made an offer, and the board met, and she wasn't there. And they decided to accept it, but they never told her about it. And a year more went by and they didn't tell her about it. The price of the stock of the partnership went way up. And suddenly she found out that they had accepted her, or they had voted to accept her offer. And so she slammed her money down on the table and said, it's mine. Give me all that stock that's now way more valuable. And that was really a case about a question of, was the acceptance communicated? But it's the same thing, right? You'll read that Dr. Jatoy's acceptance couldn't be effective. I'm sorry, the firm's acceptance of her offer couldn't be effective because it was never communicated to her. She was never told about it. She heard about it through the grapevine, but she was never told. Okay, so an offer has to be communicated in order to be effective. Before it can be accepted, it has to be communicated. Now, does that mean Steve, who's standing by the side, can't ever accept an offer? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It depends on the terms of the offer, right? What if I walk into the classroom and I say, I'll sell any of you my car for $1,000? First one who raises their hand, right? Well, now I've made an offer to multiple individuals, right? Any of you can accept it. Can you all accept it? Probably not, because I've only got one car, right? It's pretty clear from those circumstances that I'm selling it to the first one to accept, right? Or, if I stand up in a crowded room and I say, hey, I've got a Mercedes, I'll sell it for $1,000. Well, at that point, could Steve accept that? Sure, right? He's in the room. It appears that I'm communicating that to everybody. So can Steve accept it? Probably so, right? Got to be careful when it comes to advertisements. We don't really have time to get real deep into advertisements. Your book doesn't talk about it much, but understand that typically states have statutes to deal with advertisements. Even if they don't, we have common law that says that an advertisement, even if it sounds like an offer, that an advertisement is usually just a solicitation for bids. All right. And that's really a practical answer. So if somebody puts in the newspaper, right? No, nobody has newspapers. Well, newspapers still exist. Believe me, they're still out there. But if somebody puts on the internet, the car dealership, we've got Dodge Ram trucks and we'll sell them for $30,000. Well, if 10 people show up and they got 10 trucks, then they can probably sell them, right? But what if 100 people show up? What if 100 people show up and try to accept that offer? They only had 10 trucks. Have they now breached 90 other contracts? No, because there's special rules that apply to advertisements. Okay, and it's practical for exactly that reason. You can't possibly control how many people see that offer. And so if you allowed every person to accept that offer, then either we couldn't have advertisements or everybody be bankrupt, right? We couldn't possibly enforce those laws. So you can make an offer to multiple people if that's clear from the terms of the offer. Otherwise, an offer has to be communicated by the offeror to the offeree in order to be effective, and we treat advertisements a little bit differently. All right. What about time limits? How long is an offer open? How long does the offeree have to accept an offer and to thereby form a contract before the offer expires? When or how does an offer end? Right. We'll get to acceptance in just a minute. That's the flip side. That's how an offer becomes a contract. But how long does an offer stay open? Well, that's a good question. That can be an important question. Here's a term for you to learn. Here's a new legal term for the day. We've had offer, we've had offeror, we've had offeree, we've had manifestation of mutual assent. Here's an important legal term: revocation. Okay, revocation. What does revocation mean? Well, revocation means to withdraw an offer. Okay, revocation means to withdraw an offer. And the first answer to what is the lifespan of an offer is that an offer can generally be revoked at any time before acceptance, right? Now, you see, generally, I've got an asterisk there next to it. Understand that there's always exceptions in the law, and we will talk later about something called firm offers. All right, but the general rule is that an offer can always be revoked at any time before acceptance. All right. So if I say I'll sell you my Mercedes for $1,000, just kidding, right? You had a split second there. You could have accepted, but I said just kidding. I revoked that offer, right? I'll sell you my my Mercedes for $1,000. Nope, I take it back, right? I have revoked the offer. So what was the lifespan of that offer? Not very long, okay? But it's important to understand that an offer can only be revoked before acceptance. We're going to talk about acceptance in just a minute. But if I say, I'll sell you my Mercedes for $1,000 and you say I accept, I can't say, oh, no, I take it back, right? No, with that acceptance, a contract was formed. And that's why we need to know what is an agreement? When is an agreement made? When is it too late to take it back, right? Well, the answer is that generally an offer can be revoked at any time before acceptance. All right, that's the first way an offer can expire, right? The first way an offer can just die. Excuse me. Second method that could terminate an offer is by the terms of the offer itself, right? Now that may be an offer like I'll sell you my car by Friday, or I'll sell you my car before Friday. You can't accept that offer on Saturday, right? Why not? Well, because the terms of the offer right there. You can't accept on Saturday to buy my car yesterday, to buy my car on Friday. So the terms of the offer itself can terminate an offer. I'll sell you my car by Friday. Can't be accepted on Saturday. All right. It could be more complicated. You could say, I will sell you my car. I'll sell you my car on Saturday if you accept by Tuesday, right? If you accept by Tuesday, then we'll exchange the money. We'll exchange the car on Saturday. We can make it that a little more complicated like that, right? And in that case, you could accept up until Tuesday. The terms of the offer control. You can't accept Wednesday. That's too late because the terms of the offer specifically said you had to accept by Tuesday. Okay, so first two ways for an offer to expire. Number one, by revocation. Number two, by the terms of the offer itself. Third way, this is important, death or incapacity of the offeror, okay? The death or even just the incapacity of an offeror. If I say, hey, I'll sell you my car for $1,000, I'll sell you my Mercedes for $1,000 by Friday, but I die on Thursday, you can't show up Friday and accept the deal. You can't show up and say, oh, I was going to buy the car. We had a contract. You know, the estate has to give it to me. Generally, the death or incapacity of an offeror terminates an offer. Okay. And not just the death. See in there the incapacity as well. What if I am perfectly sane on January 1st and I say, hey, I'll sell you my business for $1 million. I'll give you until June 1st to think about it. And on May 15th, I lose my mind. I go completely nuts. Maybe I have a stroke. Maybe I all of a sudden Alzheimer's hits me real quick, whatever. And now I'm incapacitated. I'm still alive, but I'm not mentally competent. Well, that incapacity would also automatically terminate the offer. If you wanted to buy my business, you should have done it. You thought you had until June 1st. I said you had until June 1st. But then I became incapacitated. I got hit by a bus. Now I'm in a coma, right? Can't force me to sell the business because now I'm incapacitated. That's the third way. Fourth way would be subsequent illegality. What do we mean subsequent illegality? Well, we mean that let's say the contract was perfectly legal or the offer was perfectly legal when it was made, but before you accept it, the offer becomes illegal, right? So let's say I was going to sell a bunch of computer chips to a North Korean company, and there was nothing wrong. That was perfectly legal. I offered to sell them computer chips for $100 a piece, and they call back a month later and they say, hey, we'll accept. The problem is in the meantime, the United States has slapped sanctions on North Korea, right? No, you're not allowed to sell them computer chips anymore. Heck, maybe that's why they're accepting my offer. They had an offer out there, and now they can't buy them from anybody else. They're trying to accept. Well, no, that subsequent illegality. It wasn't illegal when I made the offer, but it became illegal. Then that generally terminates an offer as well. Okay. We'll talk about legality in a couple of weeks. Obviously, if you make an offer for something that's illegal anyway, then you don't have a contract because the subject matter of the contract is illegal. Again, we'll talk about that later when we get to illegality. But what we're talking about now is if an offer would be perfectly legal when it's made, but it becomes illegal before it's accepted, then that also serves to terminate the offer. Okay. And then the last one, and this is important, right? Write this word down. Another important legal term is rejection. Okay. Rejection. The common law is, and under the UCC too, rejection automatically terminates an offer. So what do we mean? That means that once you've rejected an offer, you cannot go back and accept it, right? So I offer to sell you my Mercedes for $1,000. And you say, no, I can't pay that, but I'll give you 800 for it. And I say, 800, are you kidding? It's a Mercedes. And you're like, yeah, I was just trying to be cheap. Okay, I'll accept $1,000. Do we have a contract? No, because when you rejected my offer, it was terminated. That offer is now dead and buried. It can never be revived. All right. Does that mean I can't sell you my car for $1,000? No, I can, but it's going to have to be based on a new offer. Okay. Once you reject an offer, it cannot be revived. Once you reject an offer, it is terminated. It's dead and buried. Now, what if I say, hey, I'll sell you my car for $1,000. You say, no, thanks. I'll give you 800. And I say, you're kidding. It's worth way more than that. And then you come back and say, oh, okay, I'll give you $1,000 for your car. What have you done? Well, you haven't accepted my offer because when you rejected my offer, it terminated. But what you may have just done is you may have just made your own offer, right? I made an offer to sell it for $1,000. You rejected it. That first offer is dead. But now you've made a second offer back to me to buy my car for $1,000. Now I'm the offeree, and now I have the chance. To accept that offer. It's important to understand that a counter offer generally works as a rejection, right? If I say I'll sell you my car for $1,000 and you say I'll give you 800 for it, that usually a counter offer is usually seen as rejection. Now that can definitely create some gray area, right? If I say, hey, I'll sell you my car for $1,000 and you say, would you take 800? Is that a counteroffer? Well, I think we have to go back and look at our definition of an offer, right? It's why these definitions are so important. Is would you take 800? Is that an offer? And I don't think it is, because that doesn't express an intent to be bound, right? That's a question. You're feeling me out. And if I say no, I don't think you've made a counteroffer. And so I think you can still accept, okay, I'll take the $1,000. But if you say, I'll give you 800 for it, that is an intent of an expression of an intent to be bound, right? You have made an offer, and so your counter offer has served to reject my offer. It terminates it, it kills it. Okay, so so the methods are generally revocation by the terms of the offer itself, by the death or incapacity of the offeror, by subsequent illegality, by rejection, or by counteroffer, which serves as a rejection. Okay, those are the ways that offers are generally terminated. I guess there's counteroffer right there at the top, right? Counteroffer serves as a rejection. We just talked about, though, was it a counteroffer? I'll give you 800, or was it just continuing negotiation? Would you take 800? Well, it depends on whether that language amounts to an offer to decide whether it's a counteroffer or not. All right, two more that are a little more complicated. One is an option, right? This may not really be a way to terminate offers. It may be a way that an offer can actually stay open. I told you that generally, right, we looked up here at the top, generally an offer can be revoked anytime before acceptance. But what about when you have an option, right? An option is a term of art as well. And an option is typically an offer that can't be revoked at will, right? It's an offer that has specifically been made to stay open for some specific period of time. Okay. Now, it is important to understand options. Okay. When is an option really an option? When is an option really an offer that can't be withdrawn? It's important to understand that in contract law, an option, at least under the common law, an option is really seen as a separate contract all by itself, right? I will sell you my car for $1,000, and I agree to keep this offer open until February 15th, right? That sounds like an option, but is it? And the answer is no. What if I see you walking towards me on February 12th and I yell, no, I take it back. I take it back. I'm not selling you my car. Have I revoked it? Well, yes, I have, because we didn't have a valid option. An option is a separate contract all by itself, which means that that option also has to meet the other requirements of a contract. And what is usually missing in those cases is consideration, what you give for what you get. If any of you have bought a house before, right, you may be familiar with the option part of the contract, right? That you put in there, that we have the option to get out of this contract, right? Essentially, what you're saying is the offer is still open for a couple more days. We haven't accepted it yet. We have a chance to get out of it. But what makes that option enforceable? Well, it's always consideration, right? You always pay something for that option. Maybe it's $10, maybe it's $100, maybe it's $1,000, whatever you pay, but you have to pay something. There has to be consideration back and forth for an option to be really an option, right? I think you have a quiz question, maybe. If you haven't looked at the quiz questions this week, that says, you go into an antique store and you see a bed and you really want to buy it, but you're not sure it'll fit in your room. And so they say, hey, okay, well, I'll tell you what, we'll sell you a bed for $1,000 and we promise to keep it for you until Friday. And you come back on Friday and you say, man, I measured and it's going to fit perfectly. I'll take it. Here's your $1,000. And they say, oh, I'm sorry, we sold it yesterday. Have they breached the contract? No, because there was never a contract formed. They made you an offer to sell you the bed for $1,000 and you didn't accept. You didn't accept yet. You didn't reject it, but you didn't accept yet. You waited around because you thought you had an option. You thought you had an enforceable right to wait until Friday to accept, but that offer to keep it open till Friday wasn't a contract because there was no consideration. There wasn't a give and a get. They were giving an offer to keep it open till Friday, but they weren't getting anything back. You were getting an offer to keep it open till Friday, but you didn't give anything back. So it was only a gift. And that gift wasn't given and received yet, right? That gift wasn't made final until you showed up with $1,000, and by that time they'd already sold the bed. Okay, so it wasn't an enforceable contract. If you want an option to be enforceable, it has to be supported by consideration, right? What kind of consideration? Well, we'll talk about consideration another week or two. We've already heard about the peppercorn, right? Turns out just about anything could be consideration. If you gave them a peppercorn to hold that offer open until Friday, that would be sufficient consideration. If you gave them $1, as long as you actually gave them the dollar, that would be sufficient consideration. They would have to keep that offer open until Friday, or else they would be in breach. That's the common law. Let's talk about our old friend, the UCC, right? We've known him for all of 2 weeks now. But the UCC changes the law a little bit. Under a common law, an offer in order to be binding, an option in order to be binding has to be supported by independent consideration. Under the UCC does not require independent consideration for an offer to be open. For an option to be binding. The UCC uses the term firm offer. What is a firm offer? Well, it is a defined term under the UCC, and it means a binding option, right? And the UCC changes the common law by saying that an offer between merchants, right? A firm offer between merchants. So you got to have a merchant on both sides of the contract. Do you remember the definition of a merchant? A merchant is someone who routinely trades in goods of this type. So a merchant would be perhaps Ford and the car dealership, right? You got two merchants there. In order for a firm offer to be binding between two merchants, it only needs to be explicit, right? It doesn't need to be supported by consideration. So under the UCC, in order for a firm offer to be binding, it only has to be between two merchants, and I'm sorry, it has to be in a signed writing. Okay, as long as it's in a signed writing, it doesn't require additional consideration. That's section 2205. It's titled firm offers, and it reads: an offer by a merchant to buy or sell goods in a signed writing, which by its terms gives assurance that it will be held open. Right. So if you have a signed writing that says, "Hey, I'm making a firm offer," then that option is created, and that option is binding. Who has to sign the firm offer? Just the offeror, right? As long as the offeror has a signed writing that says, "Hey, I'm making you this offer, and it'll stay open till Friday," then under the UCC, that's enforceable without consideration. Under the common law, you've got to have consideration. All right. Let's see. Okay, acceptance is next, and I tell you what, we're coming up on an hour, so I'm going to stop the lecture here, and we'll begin next with in the second lecture for this week with acceptance. Okay, so as normal, if you have any questions, give me a call, send me an email, shoot me a text. In fact, well, I don't know what semester you're watching this recording, okay? But most semesters I also teach a live contracts class. So if you want to, check the schedule, stop by my class. I'm always happy to answer questions then, okay? Otherwise, that'll do it for now. And when we start back up for lecture 2 for this week, we'll start on acceptance. All right, thanks very much.